to another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? I'm your host, Karen E. Osborne, and I'm so glad that you're with us today. I don't know if you noticed, but my guest is in outer space. Have you seen that? Have you noticed that? Hey, Colleen.
Hey, Karen, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you. And
Oh,
yes, I'm enjoying a leisurely spin in outer space in orbit here.
yes, yeah. How cool is that, right? So let me tell you a little bit about Colleen, and then, of course, she will tell you about herself. So she is a keynote speaker. She's an award-winning author, and she's written self-help books, including about writing. So all my writer friends out there, Colleen writes books about writing. She's also has a historical fantasy. Would that what you'd call? Yeah, historical
Yep,
fantasy. Oh,
that's it. It's a
look
historical
at
fantasy. Yes,
the
this is
curse.
the
Of,
curse of King Midas. This is the
isn't that
arc, so it has the
beautiful?
arc label on it. But yes,
That's a
thank you,
gorgeous cover. Thank you. That
thank
that I
you.
love that cover. And this is what it said about it on Amazon. Packed with myth, magic, and vengeance, this captivating tale of King Midas begins a new mythological fantasy series. And it's coming out in just a few days, right? It's available right
Yes,
now
I'm so
for
excited.
pre-order. Yes,
It is
publication
available for
days are great
pre-order now, and it officially releases on the 10th. Yes,
on June 10th. But you can get it right this minute. So we're going to
that's
tell
right.
you about it, and you're going to want to get it right this minute. So let's get started. So tell us the premise of this book.
I'm so excited about this book because it's different than any of the other novels I've written so far. I wrote it at the request of a friend of mine. I am a musician also, and we play in different music groups together. And he is also a composer and writes music, and he was considering possibly writing a musical on the King Midas myth, the one we all know about King Midas and his touch of gold. But he had learned that the best musicals are based on books. And he had read some of my other novels. So he asked me, what would you think of writing a book about King Midas? I thought, well, heck, I could give it a shot. He asked me at just the right time because my last book had just been released before that. And I had a little space to think about the next book. And nothing had immediately come to me at that time. So it was like the perfect timing. I think it was just meant to be now looking back. But thanks to him, he gave me that suggestion. And I started researching the book. What might I do with this myth? And I was just delighted to find out that King Midas was a real person. I had no idea. Did you know, Karen? Most people don't know. I sure didn't know. This guy that we've had this myth about all these years, about this, person who was, his greed drove him to seek so much gold in the myth. He was a real ruler back in the late 700s and the early 600s BC in the kingdom of Phrygia, which is modern day Turkey, like right in the middle of Turkey. And so, what is also fascinating is that the University of Pennsylvania is doing a dig at his capital city right now. They have been working on this for years. They keep revealing more of what they're finding. One of the last things they found was the big eastern gate that mark the entrance into the city. And so I found this like treasure trove of information on the history on this real person, and I was off and running. So this novel is a reimagining of the story if we combined history with myth. So it has all the fantasy elements in it. There are goddesses that are involved, and there's some magic, but the story follows somewhat the history of the real person and
Real
who his
foundation.
enemy was at that time, and the setting and all those things. So it was a blast to write. I did not know it was going to be a series when I was working on it. The story ends with a satisfying conclusion, but there are some characters that my first readers were asking me, well, what happens to so and so? And I kind of wondered that myself. So it is now branching into a series.
Wow, that is so cool. And obviously it's also going to become a musical, right?
Well, I don't know that. That's up to my friend, and he's extremely busy. He's always doing various things. So whether he can do that in the end or not, I don't know. I'm just grateful to him for even thinking about it or asking me
Yeah,
about it.
that is very cool. So there's got to be something really interesting about writing history, fantasy, myth, and to reimagine a story. What were some of the challenges as you approached this project?
Yeah, it's something that I had not done before. I am very much a pantser writer. I just write, I sit down and I just write. I don't plan it out. And so this was a different approach in writing, but it's one that I just loved. I had the myth in front of me. We know the myth. We kind of know what happens there. I could pull elements from that. And then I had the history in front of me. So I think some of the decisions came with how much of the myth, how much of the history is going to
Mm,
work in this novel. And the challenges were, the setting particularly was a challenge because, 700s, what was going on then? How did people live? What did they eat? How did they wash their clothes? All these very simple things that we take for granted when we're writing in the present. I had to really dive into that, read a lot of historical volumes from that time. It's amazing because one of the tombs that they found near King Midas's capital city, they discovered that the people had a big feast when they buried the person that was in the tomb, which they originally thought was King Midas and then realized later it was actually his father. But they had a big feast, and because of the science today, the way that they can tell, they can pull little fragments and tell what they were able to recreate this feast that the people had
wow.
2,000 years ago. So I was able to even find out what did they eat. So there was
What did
fascinating
they
things.
eat, Colleen? What did they eat?
Well, they had a Mecca salad, which was no mezza salad, I think it was called, from the Mediterranean area. They had lamb. Lamb was a big meat that they had back then. Different parsnips was a big vegetable in those days. So I can't bring it all off the top of my head, but I did find these things out. And of course, they had a type of beer. And for this feast that they did, they even recreated the beer. And there is a company that to this day sells that beer, which is fascinating. It's like the Midas mead or something like that. So yeah, so there was a lot of research, and I think some of the challenges when you are researching a lot, how do you then pull away from that research a little bit and then get going with the story? You have to balance those two.
Yes, I wrote my first historical novel because all my other books were all present day, and so my first historical novel came out last year, and
Oh,
that balancing all the things you research that are so interesting to you as a writer, but may not fit into the whole story in the way that a
oh,
reader
so
would
true.
enjoy
And
it.
how did you end up deciding, how did you end up pulling and then getting yourself back into the story?
I'm a pantser like you, and so I was, my characters were just taking me places, so they helped me with
Yeah.
that. As their lives unfolded, there were just things like, no, this little tidbit that I think is so interesting. But at book clubs, I do mention some of the interesting things that I found out, and book clubs seem to like that, the stuff that you didn't include.
I totally agree. And I find that, I mean, for your writing audience out there, for those that are writers, often when we write fiction, we can find it a little challenging how to market that fiction. And I have found because not only because everyone knows the myth of King Midas, but also because of the historical elements, my ability to market it is a little easier when you're able to pull, like you said, from the real history. People are interested in that. In fact, I'm doing a presentation on the real King Midas at a bookstore a few days before the release of the book. And so being able to put together the actual history, who was this person, and that people are interested in that, gives you a way to talk about your book in a way that seems to be, that seems to grab people's interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it opens up, I'm sure it opens up all kinds of doors for you to go out and
Mhm.
especially since speaking is part of what you do anyway, that's really, yeah, that's excellent. So you mentioned that I mentioned that you teach writers how to write and and you have nonfiction books, you have fiction books. So, what were some of the struggles that you have? How do you help writers carve out time? I find my son, he's a writer also, a published
Oh.
author, and but he's got a company that he owns and a full-time job. And so his solution is 15 minutes a day. What
That's
are
a
some
really
of the
good one.
yeah, what are some of your suggestions?
Yeah, and that is kind of what I focus on with writers. My motivational site for writers is writingandwellness.com. So I'm not really teaching writers about the craft of writing. There are many, very qualified people out there that do that. I'm helping writers to work with finding time to write, being more productive, managing self-doubt, boosting
Mm,
creativity, managing discouragement, and also a little bit about platform and book marketing as well. So it's all those other things that in our writing life can stop us or slow us down or derail our progress. I will often tell the story that I started writing novels in the mid 1990s, and my first novel wasn't published until 2015, and that was a really long time. And yes, it takes time to get better. I mean, I had like 7 manuscripts that I worked on before I finally had one that was good enough. But there's also so many other things that come up along the way that slow us down. One of the things is finding consistent time to write. And I was noticing early on, because my day job is as a freelance writer, and I started out in a corporation. And anyone who's worked with a corporation in a corporation knows that they tend to sap up all your time. I was there overtime all the time, evenings, weekends. And so I knew within a short period of time, even though I was thrilled to have the writing job, that I was not going to be able to make my writing dreams come true and manage this job because it was so demanding. So that was the point that I decided I wanted to go freelance. And so I could have more control
time.
of my time. And I
Mhm.
think looking back now, this was like, 25 years ago. Looking back now, I think we writers have to make choices that reflect what our dreams are. And we can't expect that we're going to be able to do it all. It's not going to work. And so my priority was to have more time to work on the stories that I wanted to write. And so being able to go off and work freelance and set my own hours and have the flexibility to work on my stories was a big decision that helped me a lot. So I try to tell writers, look at your life. And are you expecting too much of yourself? Are you expecting that you're going to be able to do it all and still make your dreams come true? Because most likely that's going to lead to discouragement. But even that way, I mean, I'm a freelance writer, but I'm still working full time as a freelance writer. So there's still, the challenge of fitting the fiction writing in, and how do I do that, and when is the best time for me. And these are the kind of things I help writers with, things like, when is your energy the highest, how can you fit it into your daily schedule? If it's not every day, can it be every other day? I have found myself that if I don't sit down and decide when I'm going to do it, it doesn't happen, because then we're like, okay, well, I didn't get it done today, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. Never happens. So you have to sit down
Yes.
and look
We
at
do
that
tell
schedule.
ourselves
Yeah.
stories, don't we? I just posted maybe last week on LinkedIn a story about the myths that we tell each other, tell ourselves about time and
Mm,
how much time we have, which we really don't. We just think that somehow we're going to get it all done in time. And writers have that, it's because it's a certain kind of time. It's not something you can
yeah.
multitask. For example, I'm going to write this while I'm cooking. I'm going to write this while I have a friend, Rachel Housewell Hall, who's a mystery writer, a very successful mystery writer, and she gets up like at 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock, because she has a full-time job. And, like that wouldn't work for me. 5 o'clock in the morning is the middle of the night. I'm in deep sleep. So
I hear you.
as you think
Yeah, I mean,
about,
that's such a it's such a good point that you make. I mean, I did that for a while I worked at the corporation. I was there for 3 years. So I would go in early, like an hour early. It wasn't 5, it was like around 7. But I would write for the 45 minutes to an hour before everyone was expected to be there. That worked for a while, but I could tell that it wasn't enough to get me to, you have to increase your skills as a writer. You have to be able to focus on it and learn and get better. And those little snippets of time can help you get the words down, but then you need time to get evaluation, to improve, to really sink into the story. So
plus you have to be a
yeah.
reader, right? I mean, you can't be a writer if you're not also reading. So this is, what are you writing? What are you reading? What books that you can think about that you've read in the past that has had a big impact, either on your any aspect of your life? It could be your writing life, but it could be your personal life as well.
That's a really good point about the reading, because the one that comes to mind is The Garden of Last Days by Andre Dubus III. It was the first book I read of his. Those who don't know, he wrote The House of Sand and Fog, which was also a movie, I believe, in the 90s. But it was it's amazing how things in the universe come together, because I read this book of his and then went to a workshop, a week-long writing workshop, where he was one of the speakers. I was also in a morning class through that week. And in the morning class, we were told by our instructor that it was plain stupid not to outline our stories. And so this leader of the class was a highly respected author, best-selling author, and they were telling us that this is the only way to do it. And I remember at that time, because I had not yet had a first novel published then, that I was feeling, okay, this is never gonna happen for me, because I've tried outlining and it doesn't work. I lose interest and I can't do it. And so I'm thinking, I'm might as well give up. I'm just a failure. And we were going to evening readings through that week. And so the other authors were talking about, their writing process, and one after the other, they're saying that they outline. And I'm going, oh no, I'm in such trouble. And then here comes Andre Dubus III. Totally opposite story. He starts talking, and I just felt this, flow of honey over me. It's like, oh, thank heavens, because his writing process, as he described it, was very much like I had found mine to be. Not that I'm comparing my writing process to his or my writing to his, but he was talking about how he dives down deep under the water like a whale. And he just goes in this place, and then the story comes. And he was actually saying that outlining can be a bad thing, because it can limit us into what we consciously, on the left side of the brain, think that the story should be about. Whereas his point is that if we back off a little bit, sink down into our, deeper brain waves, and let the creativity come, that what happens is often more original than we might have thought on just if we just outline from the left side of the brain. Because if we can get to that right side, that creative side, in our writing process, we can often come up with a more original story. So I listened to him and I thought, oh, this is wonderful, because this is giving me hope that the way I'm doing it is okay. And so I've continued to read his books since then and attend his signings, and I've learned so much more from him as well. But when you ask which one affected my life, that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah, I love that story. It does make me feel better about my process too. But I must say, I meet people who do both and have really good outcomes, so you just have to
Right. It's
find
like,
what
what works for
works
you? I think
for
I
you.
think the damage is telling people that there's only one way. Yes.
Exactly. That was such hubris, right? My
Yes.
way is the only way.
Right.
Uh, I'm glad you didn't tell us his name. So, is something that you've read recently or you're reading now that you could recommend to our audience?
Right now I'm reading The Life of Pi. And I'm reading it because I love the movie. And I am finding myself surprised at how gritty it is, because he goes into detail. I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the book. You have. So there are animals on the boat with this lone survivor, after their boat sank, and he's on the boat with a hyena, a zebra, an orangutan, and a tiger.
Yeah, the tiger.
And
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that from the movie. And in the movie, he was frightened of the tiger, and there's all those interactions going on. But in the book, it's very visceral, and it's really like you're immersed into this animal kingdom, a lot more than you are in the movie. And it's difficult to read at times, because the hyenas going after the zebra and tearing into it, and there's these battles going on between the animals. And so I'm reading that now, and just it's amazing to me how movie producers, and there's always the debate, which is better, the book or the movie. I feel like they're two different forms. That's what most writers think. But I like exploring how they need to adjust a story to make a movie work for a movie audience. Because obviously, you're talking about a different audience there, and a different what do you call it? Different mode of communicating the story. A medium. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So I'm finding that fascinating to see what they pulled from in the book. Oftentimes you'll read a book at, like, Hunger Games. The movie was almost exactly like the book in all the situations. But in this one, there's quite a difference, and I can see why they made the difference for the movie audience. So I'm finding that fascinating.
Yeah, it reminds me of The Godfather, because in some ways, they made the book even better. They did better than the book in the movie, because they were able to, so it's usually I love the book better, but that was one where I thought the movie really did so much more. I'd love to be able to write a screenplay. I have to try that someday.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about that, when I was thinking about if this musical ever would happen, how would you write the musical? It'd be an entirely different process than writing a novel. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. So now that we've got everybody intrigued, everybody is so glad they met you. Everybody wants to read The Curse of King Midas, right? Am I saying the title right?
You got it.
The Curse of King Midas. There it is again. They can pre-order it right now, and it drops on June 10th. How can they find you, though? Because now they're totally taken by you. How do they find you?
You're very kind, Karen. Okay, it's my author website is www, and then just my name, ColleenMStory.com. And Colleen is with 2 L's and 2 E's. M is in Mary, story.com. Writers who are interested in what I'm talking about over there, it is writing and wellness spelled out.com. And then all my social links are on those sites.
Writing and wellness. I like that. Writers need wellness. We do. I hope you have enjoyed meeting Colleen as much as I have enjoyed meeting
Absolutely.
her. I hope that you will buy her book, that you will read it, and that please, you hear me say this all the time, but don't forget to write a review. That makes such a difference for us. Until next time. Next week, next Tuesday. This is What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.